Hello, Heather.
Hi.
Thank you for joining to this interview. And this is interview where I will ask you about your experience of studying Gestalt therapy, teaching Gestalt therapy, and being a member of Gestalt therapy community.
Sounds good.
Okay. So first of all, could you tell me how old are you, where are you from, and where you living now?
Okay. So I will be 44 by the time this is published. My birthday is next week. I was originally born in Hamilton, which is a city in Canada, in the English part of Canada. And I've been living in Mexico for the past 24 years. So I've spent more than half of my life in Mexico, and Mexico is actually where I discovered Gestalt and became a Gestalt therapist.
Mhm.
So that piece is relevant.
Yeah. And could you tell more about how did you become a Gestalt therapist and how it's happened?
Yeah, I come from a family that didn't go to therapy while I was growing up. Probably should have, because there were a lot of traumas in my family, and nobody really had a lot of tools to deal with those. That was everything from on my mother's side, World War One veterans having children who were World War II veterans, having children who were my grandparents' generation, and all of their traumas, the alcoholism, the broken social networks, everything that there was no support for systemically. And my family culturally on that side had like the very British, we're fine, everything is fine. But nothing was fine, clearly, given how we all turned out. There were a lot of things that needed some attention. And most of my mom's generation figured that out themselves. Some through addictions recovery programs, some through, adult children of alcoholic programs. But a lot of them did end up, finding support in different ways. I did a lot of moving around, to not say running away, because I didn't like literally run away from my home, but I went on exchanges and lived in different countries because I was going to drop out of school if I didn't find something that made me feel challenged and able to stay. So I would work and then I would spend all of my money going on a semester abroad. Um, and in university, one of those semesters abroad was to Argentina. And I was teaching English. And I was teaching English in the center of Buenos Aires. And my students were all adults. They were like university professors. And turns out a lot of them were actually in psychoanalysis. And so my conversation classes would get a lot of cancellations because people would say, I have to go see my analyst. And I was like, what the fuck is this? What are they doing? What are they? I want to do that. It's like when you go to a place and everybody's eating a food you haven't tried. I was like, I want to try that. And a couple of my students were, very respected professors at the University of Buenos Aires. And they're like, yeah, well, we can't see you because, we're full for the next 5 years. But they sent me to one of their students. And so I started going to psychoanalysis when I was 18.
Hmm.
Um, it was a good couple of years off and on because I would go during the summer semesters. Um, and I was like, oh, I like this process of thinking and understanding things and understanding myself and having those moments of awareness of putting things in words. I know that's not quite the purpose of psychoanalysis, but that's what I was getting out of it. It was like not so much what the analyst would tell me about myself, but it was just like, holy crap, I just realized something. So I really enjoyed that and moved to a couple of different shifts in my life in Canada and ended up doing my last semester of my undergrad, which was in social anthropology, not in psychology. I got a 63 out of 100 in the only psychology undergraduate course that I took because I forgot that I had signed up for the course. I didn't go until I got a notification that I had to take the exam a week later. So I tried to learn the entire semester's worth of intro to psychology in a week to present an exam. I got 63. So I'm not a psychologist. But social anthropology was really useful because it was systems, it was field, it was understanding the patterns and the social organization of all of these different places that I kept dropping myself into and needing tools and lenses to interpret. So that was what I was doing in Mexico. And then I finished my undergrad and I went, well, now what? And I'd applied for a master's in social anthropology, but I went back to Canada. I sat in my, advisor's office and I just looked around and I said, I can't do this. I don't want to be here. He's like, but your profile was great. We've already, there's a scholarship. And I'm like, I'm going back to Mexico. So I got on a plane and went back to Mexico and had no idea what I was going to do. People around me were doing a lot of social activism. I was doing a lot of work in the queer community, like the Pride March organizing committees and all of those kinds of things. Um, because there was still, a lot of stigma around being queer in Mexico. There were a lot of organizations that were still doing very basic AIDS education. Things that had happened where I was from like 15 years ago were still getting resistance here in Mexico. So that's the community that I was hanging out in. And a few of those people were doing their master's degrees in human sexuality and in this thing called Gestalt psychotherapy. And there was a lot of overlap between the instructors in those two programs in that community. So they're like nudging me in this direction. I needed to study something. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll apply for this therapy thing. So I did. I was 23. They told me I was too young. They said, like, the expression is go break your face a bit and then come back,
Too
like
young to what?
to get some life experience to apply for the master's program. They're
Uh-huh.
like,
Oh,
you're too
Gestalt
young.
therapy.
Yeah, they're like, you've
Yeah.
gone from kindergarten to a master's degree
Uh,
without not, learning and knowing things. So I did a year pre-study to that, and I guess I was just persistent. I didn't go away. So they let me into the master's program the next year. And I ended up actually leaving three different cohorts. I did a 2-year program in almost 5 years. Because it was very intense, it was very experiential, it was very provocative. And I was also in an abusive relationship at the same time that I was doing the program. So the level of cognitive dissonance that I had to maintain to be learning things and understanding them and doing all of these group dynamics where you can express yourself and receive authentic support and blah, blah, and then going home and having like this abusive, controlling, dominating person like slapping the shit out of me, shaming me for having friends, for having said this or said that in the therapy program. It was a lot to deal with. And there were a couple of faculty members who decided to share with me, that they wanted to get me pregnant. So I was like, what? Dealing with that aspect of like, no, that's not what I'm here for. Um, just it got really
so
messy.
you say that they want some sexual connection with
There was
you?
some sexual harassment from some faculty during the program.
Mm.
But it was one of those, it's framed as, challenge your boundaries, don't hold yourself back, I can help you experience more things, and all the way to the degree of you need to know what it is to be a mother. I can take you there. And it was like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
Uh,
very weird situation actually.
yeah, yeah. And there's so, I learned Gestalt in a Mexican institute founded by Mexican man, and like most of the institutes here in Mexico, it's a family business. Um, so sorry, parking. Sorry. So there were different, family members embedded in the institution, which makes it very difficult to talk about problems
Mhm.
that might be happening because that's, somebody's actual direct family member or it's their, extended family or whatever. It's like, okay.
Mhm.
But it's a huge business in Mexico. Gestalt therapy is a private university model. There are very few programs which have a Gestalt focus, although there are more of them. But an actual, what we call like a master's level, which is only a 2-year training program here. They're almost exclusively run in private universities all over the country, with basically no like regulatory oversight. They have to meet the criteria of the Secretary of Education on a federal level and on a state level. And they have to prove that they have, the right kind of building with available parking and that kind of like logistical, local level things. But they get their permit, they get their study plan approved, and then they're free. There's no oversight. Like they have to submit statistics, like this many students entered, this many students graduated, but that's it. Um, so there
So
was
there is
no,
no control from government to these private like
once it's
universities.
approved, every once in a while you have to officially submit a paperwork
Yeah.
plan of, we've updated the curriculum or whatever. Um, but the intervention is just really hands off, which is good. It's great. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's blind trust in that whatever is happening on the inside is fine. And, I'm sure you've run into the idea that there are a lot of narcissists in the field of psychotherapy. So giving them a lab or giving them what we would call here like a barrel of fish and then letting them shoot fish in a barrel, it's a dangerous model sometimes as well. Because one thing that is generally was not, I mean, I trained 15 years ago, so some programs have updated and some institutes are doing incredible work and very transparent. But others really took advantage of that lack of oversight. They didn't include ethics in the curriculum. They didn't include really practical things like how to run a business as a therapist. Like nobody ever told me or most of the therapists in Mexico, how to run your business, like paying taxes, registering your whatever. Um, there is no obligation to learn about client privacy and information storage. Note taking is basically optional as people are trained in a lot of institutes here.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of variety in terms of what Gestalt is. But where I was going with that is the model that the state gives leaves a lot of room for freedom,
Mhm. Mhm.
which, it's a blessing and a curse. It's like you leave a bunch of humans alone on an island and you have a social experiment. You may not have
Mhm.
a functioning society, but you'll get some interesting experiences.
Mhm. Mhm. And can you tell more about how Gestalt education organized? I mean, you said that it was 2 years course and 5 years course. What's the difference between
No,
them?
it's only it's almost anywhere between 2 or 3 years.
Uh-huh.
Um, Sometimes these schools have programs during the week, like I went during the week, which is an evening school, which was like 7 to 10 p.m. Monday to Thursday, and then they have the most common model is the weekend intensives, which are Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Three
Uh,
days, yeah?
yeah, 3 days. So the intensives are intense. A lot of people travel from smaller cities or whatever, usually to state capitals. Some of the institutes have multiple sites in different states, but there's like a central
Mhm.
organization. Institutionally, there is no uh, government organization. like the secretary of psychotherapy, or it's not that. It's not controlled by the College of Psychologists or anything like that. Because here in most of the institutes, not all of them, you can apply like me without a psychology background. Some of them make you take like a psychology 101, others do not. So you can have an engineer doing a master's in psychotherapy who has never taken a psychology class.
Mhm.
Um, they may be a wonderful therapist, or they may not know what they don't know and really be very poorly prepared.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, some of the programs still, I think they used to do this more. They would give you an option of doing like the first half of the program without making it academic or without you trying to get a degree. You could just basically go and do a year of group therapy and reading, um, and not be certified in any way by doing that. But because no one controls the practice of psychotherapy, there's a lot of people saying, oh, I did my training, but they never finished it. Or they never did their clinical hours, or they never did the supervision.
Mhm.
But you can put a sign outside your house that says, I'm a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
People are getting, clients are getting much better at asking the right questions to find out um, about the credentials of their therapist. And thank you, TikTok and things like that, where people are saying, hey, this is what you should actually look for in a therapist. Because people used to be just very trusting and be like, it sounds official, and there's something in the culture of Mexico of just being like, wow, an authority. Like I used
Mhm.
to get called doctor all the time. I'm like, I am not a doctor. Please
Mhm.
don't do that.
Mhm. Okay, and uh, how diploma named? Like Gestalt therapist or Gestalt practitioner, or what's the name of diploma?
Um, each institute registers the name of their program as whatever they want. I mean, they're not going to call you like an electrician in Gestalt, but there's versions. Some use the word psychotherapist, and there have historically been problems because some of them do not use the word psychotherapist. Some use therapist. Some use what is it? It was something about like a master's in humanistic something. So you get the degree, but it doesn't actually say psychotherapist. And people are like, I was told I was becoming a psychotherapist. Why does it say something different? I've been here for 2 years. I wrote a thesis. I did 400 clinic hours. Why am I not a therapist? But they don't read the fine print when they're signing up for the program. So,
Mhm.
but that's not intentional. I think people, when they registered things originally, were just being creative with language and trying to express what they were teaching. Uh,
Mhm. 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 And what?
there are doctoral programs, there are specializations, there's a lot of overlap here between education and Gestalt, sexuality and Gestalt. Um, those are the big ones, really. Those two fields. I know a lot of countries understand social work in a different way. Social workers are not a big part. They're not connected with Gestalt psychotherapy, but the idea that a social worker will be seeing people in a clinical therapy setting is not really part of what they do here.
Mhm.
Uh,
Sorry, one moment. And next question, what conditions must be met to become Gestalt therapist? To
you you have to pass the final exam,
Mhm.
present your whatever method your institute approves for you to get your degree. Sometimes you can get your master's degree by doing part of your doctorate and not writing a thesis for your master's degree. And they're like, oh, well, but you've done these extra hours. Um, most of them do it by thesis. So it's an independent, I mean, supervised, but individual research project.
Uh,
Sometimes they're case studies, sometimes they're theory based, sometimes they're based on group or field work. But I mean, in theory, everyone who goes through a master's level program will have some kind of methodology that they study, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods. People learn, what that is. Not a lot of statistics, but they tend to go more for the qualitative. And then you present that to a panel of people from within the institute, and you pass,
Mhm,
or you don't, which is
mhm,
rare. Um, it's not meant to be like a scary, challenging thing because it's all internal. I mean, your
mhm,
supervisor, your thesis director, they're all from within the institute.
mhm,
They're not trying to stop you from becoming a therapist. They're trying to teach you what you need to get there.
mhm,
And some people don't finish. Some people finish the training and never present the project. That really changed probably about 5 years ago. There was a big push to like, hey, remember you studied here 5 years ago. Come back, finish your thesis. And there were a lot of like pushes of all of these people who sort of wandered off to get them back through the final step.
mhm, mhm,
um, which is good because it's that's when I think Mexico started to integrate a lot more with the international Gestalt communities. And they're like, oh, research, yeah, research is really important. Look how much research we do. We do all the research. Everybody writes a thesis. So
mhm,
they're like, come back, write your thesis. We told them everybody writes a thesis.
mhm.
Um, but
Okay.
that's
And does Gestalt therapists need to has individual psychotherapy or supervision or some sort of intensives, conferences, so on?
It depends. Institutional requirements vary, but I mean, in general, yes, it
What
would be,
about your institute?
yeah. So when you say my institute, there's the one that I studied at, and then there's the one that I founded. So I started an institute as well with curriculum design and all of that. And I modeled it on the institutes that do require, within the training, group therapy is a course. People are expected in most places to stop or reduce their individual therapy outside when they're in the group phase of the program. People are not told, don't go to therapy, therapy is bad, but they're directed towards bringing their experience into the group
Mm,
instead of doing a lot of outside parallel processing. Like it makes those group experiences really intense, and very rich because there's a lot of, interpersonal work. It's not just like, me and the story of my mother or whatever. It's what's happening between us and the dynamics that are going on in the group that's very much a part of how most of the institutes work. Some of the dynamics are very provocative. And so some people are very triggered and overwhelmed by that. Bringing trauma into the group trainings, like I think a lot of places, is fairly recent. So some of those really intense experiences seen from today's perspective were probably actually quite violent, or re-traumatizing at least. Um, so that's where therapy goes. And most of the institutes have a space, which is also an additional income stream for the institutes, where the students practice therapy with people who come in from the outside and are like, hi, I would like, one of your student therapists, please. The rates are lower, they're more accessible. Sometimes they can get big groups. I mean, when I was doing my clinic hours, I had multiple groups a week, 25 clients, which is a really rare experience for a new therapist, right?
mhm,
Especially getting people to say yes to group therapy. Usually, when people can afford individual, that's where they go. But at these student clinics, which tend to have a lower cost, people are like, what's the cheapest therapy you have? And so they say group therapy, and they're like, sure, whatever, I will take that.
I
Um,
see. So, does group therapy popular in Mexico?
there's a lot less resistance to it than in other places. Um, a lot of times because of need. like the
Mhm.
cost factor. But also a lot of therapists, can't get a group going on their own. It's difficult. People are like, no, 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 I want the online, I want the individual, I don't want to share my things with other people.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And
so
does Gestalt therapy popular in Mexico at all, generally, I mean?
um, among therapists, it's popular. I wouldn't say that if you ask the average person on the street, hey, do you know what Gestalt therapy is? That they probably would not say yes. Um, but Mexico is one of probably the top four producers of therapists in the world, of Gestalt therapists. I mean, it's Ukraine, Russia, Brazil, and Mexico
Mhm.
in terms of numbers. I
Do
mean,
you have
there are
some
multiple.
do
Yeah.
you have some idea how many Gestalt therapists in Mexico could be?
People keep asking this question, but I mean, there are thousands.
Thousands.
These institutes are celebrating like 35 years of being an institute. And if you multiply that by 25 people per cohort per year, and sometimes they have up to 14 satellite institutes, that's a lot of therapists. Um,
Mhm.
it's filtered into some of the universities, like where people have bring in three Gestalt friends, and now your university program is also teaching in a humanistic way, even though that's not maybe what was originally intended. Um, so it's doing okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like the institutes are not closing. The institutes are not falling apart. They're not in crisis like a lot of the American institutes are, where they're like, oh no, we only had 5 people sign up this year. Here, there's still 25, 30 people per course, per institute, per year.
Uh-huh.
Um,
In
it's
one
still,
group, you mean? In one
yeah.
group, it's 45, 25, 30 people. Okay. And mm, how do you think what are its advantages and limitations of Gestalt therapy education in Mexico?
Well, and this is where, I wonder, am I the person to speak to this part? But I mean, Gestalt adapts, right? Like it's this whole field theory in and of the field. Mexican Gestalt is Mexican Gestalt. Um, it's like there were shamanic aspects, traditional aspects, ritual aspects, just cultural um, flavors and tones to what I was taught, where I was taught it. And it's not been, well, it wasn't when I started. It has been more because the more it's been internationalized, the more the colonial model has happened of bringing in the famous white European or American person, probably also old person, to teach, the official version of Gestalt.
Mhm.
It was a lot more assimilated and integrated with Mexican culture in the ways that some of the institutes further away from the urban centers, like outside of Mexico City, more towards the coast or the south, or like because Mexico is huge and the regional and cultural differences are very big. So a lot of institutes really have their own identity in that way of, this is how, and it can be everything from, is a graduation ceremony going to have a mass or is it going to have like a traditional sweat lodge ceremony? Um, what do the students want? How do they identify? How do they make it their own?
Mhm.
Um, so I know I've moved from the question. What was the
The
question?
question was about advantages and disadvantages as you think, like as person, as a Gestalt therapist.
Yeah, I mean, I think the advantages are the freedom that Mexico offers structurally, the richness of diversity of cultures here. And the disadvantages are also sort of the way the post colonial legacy of the way that Mexico tends to be positioned and to then position itself below the Anglo-American or European standard. Um, I mean, like politically, that's the way it is as well. People are like, oh, well, why don't you go back to Canada? I'm like, well, because my papers are Mexican. My degree says, in Spanish that I am a Mexican psychotherapist. And to go back to Canada, they're like, yeah, you can go work at a restaurant with that. You can't be a therapist. It's the hierarchy of our papers are better than your papers. And so a lot of people know that, but they don't understand that it's just bureaucracy. They actually believe or have internalized that there is a degree of validity to that superiority inferiority model. And it's difficult. Like when I started the Mexican Gestalt Association, I had the idea that it would be like mutual exchange. Like, yes, let's, cross-pollinate and bring in people who are not Mexican to talk about how they do things, but not to worship that and say that this is the ideal way. But I would sell 5 times as many tickets to an event that a non-Mexican facilitated than I would to a Mexican facilitator with 5 times as much experience. So
Mhm.
that's complex, and getting Mexican therapists to write, to publish, to bring their work into conferences or congresses or presentations, it was difficult. It was really hard. And I mean, I know that there's an element of privilege to that. Like people need to have paid hours of work. You're not going to get rich being a therapist in Mexico. A lot of people have a second job or are like a teacher with a salary or a
But
psychologist
why
in an institution.
is it difficult to have a good money to being a Gestalt therapist in Mexico?
Because the average income in Mexico is so far below the average income in countries where these models came from,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? I mean, if you're working with, uh, like a blue collar worker, someone who's in construction, they're making like €5 or $5 a day.
Mhm.
And that's what they get. They have no insurance, they have no,
Yes.
therapy is a luxury.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you want to reach people who need it, there's no government program that pays therapists to give therapy.
Mhm.
That's no, it
Mhm.
doesn't happen.
Not so
So
many people can afford it, yeah?
no. And in the major cities, it's the same. You get like the very bourgeois, like, oh, I have my fancy clinical office in a very nice city in a very nice part of town. So some people can make a lot of money, but they're working with rich clients.
Yeah, I get it. Mhm.
So asking therapists to present their work, it takes time away from their paid work. And it's difficult sometimes for people to make that balance make sense for themselves. Or there
Mhm.
are a lot of internalized worry of, do I have anything worth saying?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, thank you. And um, who is Gestalt therapist? And how would you define this role?
I mean, for me, Gestalt therapist is a person who is trained in and practicing Gestalt therapy, however that was defined by their institute, however they understand that. Um, I don't think that a Gestalt therapist is just anyone who wants to call themselves that. I don't go that far. Maybe I'm very unforgiving or rigid, but I think it requires, technical, theoretical, ethical knowledge. It requires an awareness of the context, the field of mental health, the cultural field that you're working in. Um, in general, after you've met that requirement, like, yeah, people can do that in any number of ways, and the creativity is
Mhm.
there, and combining it with all of the other, things that people may want to emphasize, like couples work, sex work, no, sex therapy work,
Mhm.
yeah, group teaching, like it's a very versatile way of working. I think it's and a lot of interaction with social issues and social justice issues and community development. Gestalt has a lot to bring to that, and people are also starting to understand the potential not just to move, I hate to hierarchize, but down into community, also moving up into organizational fields and having some influence, like humanizing industry and even medical institutions. There's a lot of paths for Gestalt here.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And uh, what next question? Uh, you said that you are founder of Gestalt Institute, right?
Mhm.
Can you say more about it? What's the name of this institute?
Yeah.
When you found it? And
Yeah, I'll leave the names out of that part. I divorced the institute and its co-founder because it was not a good model for an institute. It was one of those institutes that became quite a cult of personality with a charismatic leader, um, who I had to separate myself from because that was a very different vision and it went beyond what for me was ethical. So that institute for me was a failed experiment that I could not stand behind.
Mhm.
But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to structure programs, and I got to play, bringing in different perspectives and doing a lot of experiments with students and understanding, how I like to teach Gestalt. Um, Not just, in a self-centered way, but having a platform like an institute, it allows you to contact other people with platforms.
Mhm.
Um, so I learned I learned a lot by teaching.
Mhm. So you were co-founder of Gestalt Institute, but you broke up, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. So and now you're a Gestalt trainer. Yeah, you teach Gestalt therapist
Mhm.
for Gestalt
Yep.
therapy.
Because that's the weird thing, right? I don't think that I'm overqualified, but I'm not, easily welcomed back into other Mexican institutes because I already had one. So there's this idea of like competition somehow. Um, and it may just be me personally, but I haven't seen a lot of people who have, grown up within one institute then be welcomed into another one. So there's a lot of like protection and sort of jealousy around the institutional identity in the model, which is valid. But after a while, it starts to suffocate things, I think. Um, so yeah, I was trained in one institute, came up in that. Uh, the person I founded the other institute with was faculty where I trained. And it was very much one of those like narcissistic predator kind of dynamics, which is, like I said, a very bad foundation for whatever project came after that. Um, so, yeah, making an institute a family business means that the family dynamics come into that. And if the family dynamics are messy and dysfunctional, guess what? Your institute's going to fall apart. So,
Yeah, I see.
yeah, and a lot of students don't know what they're signing up for. They're like, this looks like a real school.
Mm,
You have no idea the personality shit show that's going on behind it
mm,
sometimes.
mm. Yeah,
And
it's
that's international. That's not just my case, that's not just Mexico. That's international.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay. And can you say more how professional identity of Gestalt therapist formed through the training process, in your own opinion?
Um, there's a lot of like literally putting on the t-shirt with the logo of this is my identity now. I am part of this institutional like soccer team or whatever. Um, which is great because it creates this idea of community and we do it this way and um, but it's like when you grow up in a family, you still have to have this individualizing differentiation of like, well, we did it this way, but and then you step away. And this is when people, you know, go out and start doing the work instead of doing the supervised work or doing the practice work within the institute. And a lot of people find support by doing continuing education, like smaller courses or workshops, or it's great. It's not required by the government. Once you get your degree, your license, that's it. You can go and practice psychotherapy until you die. You never have to take another course as long as you live. But most people, just out of ethics, are like, oh, there are new books coming out. There are new things happening. I should probably be aware of that. So this is where like the FOMO, the fear of missing out, and the also the marketing on the part of the institutes keeps people profiling themselves, developing their identity, learning how to become more and more specialized until they come to the point where they can be like, oh, I think this is who I am and this is what I do.
Okay. And you talked about it, but I say it anyway. What ethical questions arise most frequently during your experience of being Gestalt therapist, being trainer?
Boundaries. Like
Boundaries.
have some boundaries, people. Please have some boundaries.
Mhm.
Um,
And what ethical code do have Mexican Gestalt therapists?
I wrote one.
Wow,
Couldn't
you
find
wrote,
one.
you
I wrote
wrote.
one. I wrote an ethical code, and during the 10 years that the Mexican Gestalt Therapy Association was active, anyone who presented at a conference or gave a workshop, they had to check a little box on their form that said, I agree to abide by the code of ethics of the Mexican Association. I don't know if anybody ever read that document.
Mm,
But it was there, and it was, I mean, I didn't finish it, but I started a master's program in bioethics because I'm really interested in ethics. I'm like, how can we balance all of the factors that make something seem important with principles of justice and fairness and, doing no harm, but also allowing ourselves to exist and be agents of change and influence. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and not a lot of people want to talk about it. But now some of the institutes, like I said, have started to integrate courses on psychotherapy ethics. And they do have their own codes because people have spoken up against, some of those more predatory or abusive or misconduct kind of
mm,
situations. So all of the institutes have figured out that we can't just do whatever we want. Um, and one institute actually was, very publicly exposed in sort of the Me Too movement of a whole large number of students speaking out about one particular institutional director who, based on everything that was shared, was just very sexually predatory. Um, but people are started to speak up and use public forums to say, this is not okay. Um, and people have lost, positions, careers, practices.
no.
There have been consequences. A lot of it has been more social than legal, because basically there is no recourse, because your license to practice therapy is really just a document that says you finished the program. Congratulations. It doesn't make you accountable for what you do as a therapist. Like you basically have to kill somebody in your office on camera. Um, but your license, you still finished the program. Like you're not going to have it taken away, and there's no consequences professionally for having that taken away.
Yeah, I see.
It's difficult. And I mean that's again, that's the shadow side of all of the freedom that there is in Mexico. Because some other places are so tightly controlled, that therapists are losing their license, their business, their ability to practice, their entire reputation because of something that they post on their personal social media. Like that for me is professional regulation gone way too far.
Yeah. Mhm.
But here, no. It's-
And can you tell more about your Mexican Gestalt Association, right?
It was an experiment based on the AAGT, the Association for the Advancement of Gestalt Therapy, which now has international in front of its name.
Mhm.
They did a conference here in Mexico in 2012 in a city called Puebla. Um, I was looking for presenters. I was like, I wonder who could come and, maybe teach a summer course or something. And I ended up contacting Rita Resnick, who said, well, I'm busy, but I'm sure I'll see you at the conference in Mexico. I was like, what conference? There's a conference? People have conferences? I didn't know this. Because I was taught in a bubble in the Institute. And so she said, "What we're actually looking for volunteers. Would you like to review some proposals? And you score them, and that's it. That's your volunteer." I was like, "Yes!" And so I started reading them. I'm like, all of these things are going to be happening at this conference. This is crazy. What else can I do? And so they invited me to join a couple of committees because I was enthusiastic and I was a free volunteer who spoke two languages. So it was really useful. And then that's what I learned what these Gestalt organizations do. And I was like, oh, basically you just have a giant like Gestalt nerd party every 2 years. That sounds great. Let's do that. And so I thought, well, there were 450 people at that conference. At least half of them were Mexican. I was like, we can do this maybe next year a lot cheaper without all the foreigners and not have to worry about translation. We can do like a Mexican version of this. Um, and then I managed to get 13 Gestalt Institutes to agree that that sounded like a really good idea, which apparently nobody believed that anyone would ever be able to do because they were so separate and there was such a history of protectiveness, jealousy, like personal issues between the founders. But I just told everybody that everybody else was coming. And so they went for it. They're like, well, if everybody else is going, then I have to be there too. So I got them all to come.
Mhm.
And then they let their students go and they let their faculty present. But that didn't last.
Why?
It started to fall apart because the jealousy and the protectiveness instead of collaboration started to happen more. And it was more, if I announced that we were doing an event in a major city, um, this happened one time. One director said, "Yes, I will go. I will be your keynote speaker." And then 3 weeks before the event, they not only withdrew, but they held their own event in the same city, and they made all of their students and all of their faculty go to their event. Like it was direct competition. And I was just like, well, I'm not doing this anymore. This is ridiculous. Like, you win. I wasn't competing. But sometimes that idea of collaboration it feels really threatening because it implies, like Yontif would say, exposure is a trigger for shame. So coming together publicly, interinstitutionally, and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, you might be doing something that other people are doing differently or better. And so there's that risk. And a lot of people, it's a financial risk, it's a very real risk, can have a real impact. Um, and just even in marketing terms, like if the other institute looks fancier, you're going to lose your clients. Your business is going to suffer. So it's a risk. And people ended up playing strategically much more guarded, much more closed. And so the idea of like we're all friends, we can all share, we're not, yeah, that's not true because it's still capitalism. It's still a
So,
game.
so your association is not very popular?
No, it was not popular. It was a lot of people enjoyed it. Like I would have, 300, 400 people at the events. But sometimes they would only come once, or sometimes the institutes would only come to use it as a marketing platform and to try to take from it.
Mm,
There was not a lot of reciprocity,
I
and it
see.
was a lot of work because running an association here is a horrible business model. Um, and it's, making 400 people happy is not an easy business. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, that I decided to close it this year. We did a lot of online events. So, I mean, I learned a lot about opening different spaces and doing a lot of connecting on different levels that did not threaten or compete with the institutes. And that's pretty much where I am, excuse me, personally with my projects right now, which is where the other thing of like in 2020, I said, I'm not doing another conference. This isn't working. Um, like just the criticism and the impossibility of keeping enough people happy to make it a good model, it was brutal. So I was like, I'm just going to talk to people on the internet for free. And so that's when I started doing humans. Um,
Humans of
and
Gestalt,
Humans
right?
of Gestalt. Yeah,
Mhm.
which is just a totally different thing.
Mhm.
But the scale model version of what the European Gestalt Association or the IAAGT is, that's what we did in the Mexican Association. Part of the difficulty was that leadership did not just come up. Like there was nobody who wanted to come in and be like, I want to lead this association. I have a vision or a project or an idea. And I know that it's not okay for me as a, white Anglo-Canadian, even though I'm bilingual, like I said, I've been here 24 years, I'm a Mexican citizen. It's still not right for me to be in the leadership position there for life. Like I needed a whole team of people. Like I built this, if it's useful, keep it. It wasn't useful, so I just let it go.
Quite sad story, actually.
It is, but I mean, a lot was learned and community, even though not the formal structure, but there is community. There really is. A lot of people learned in that space how to present their own work. They're like, wow, I wouldn't have done this internationally. But sometimes, because of personal invitations, like a lot of it was like, hey, would you like to give a presentation? People are like, me? It's like, yes, you. And they did, and they were wonderful. But they're like, they hadn't been pushed into that growth before. So I don't think it was a failure. I mean, it certainly didn't produce money ever.
Mhm.
Um, but it gave a lot of interesting opportunities. And I'm kind of glad that I killed it actually before it became a fixed gestalt, which is what
Mhm.
a lot of the international institutions become, is this is the way we do things. These are the people who have power. Then they say you yes and you no, and here yes and here no, and that's it. And that hits like a ceiling. And what I was looking for was like all of this new membership coming up. But once the organization becomes too rigid, there's nowhere to go.
Mhm.
And everything inside that bottle just dies. But it's
Mhm.
trapped. Like it's not
Mhm.
circulating anymore. So
I see. Thank you. And one more question. How do you see the development of Gestalt therapy in the nearest future, in general, in the world, and maybe in Mexico also?
yeah, I've asked about 400 people that question
Wow.
on my YouTube channel. It's like, and there are 400 different answers.
Yeah,
It's
I can
like,
imagine it easily.
yeah, where do I see it going? What I observe, not like what my vision is, my observation is that because people can't get up through that bottleneck in the traditional structures, there's a lot of creative adjustment going on. And, like if it can't get out the top, it's going to start to come out the sides. And so this is where all of these networking experiences among professionals, you have like horizontal lateral movement, and that's community development. And people are not looking quite so much upwards. They're like, "Hey, you're a therapist. I'm also a therapist. Let's talk about this," instead of waiting for someone to come in and teach them. Um, and I mean, so many people, like with all of these other qualifications, like years of experience in professional development organizations or teaching or whatever, they were all in here in this community bubble, but they were getting stuck. Um, there's so much richness on that level now. Doesn't need to go up. It's doing this. Like it's that whatever that movement is, that's what it's doing. It's like circulating and swirling and intermingling horizontally.
Mhm.
I don't think Gestalt is, I mean, a lot of people are trying, sorry, but I don't believe that it's going to succeed in classic academia, for example. Like, I mean, who are we kidding? We can put language on it, but that's not what most of us do. Um,
Mhm.
does that matter? Probably not. The other really more interesting to me process that's happening is, as all of these international voices start connecting, going around the big systems of power, that's when decolonizing comes in. And people actually, instead of just filing up the same model, they start to deconstruct it and are like, actually, it doesn't have to go that way. And maybe it's not the best thing that it does. Maybe we're coming in with different ways of learning, like the Mexican shamanic traditions and the Indian perspective and the Asian and South Pacific perspectives. It's like there are so many different ways of doing things that those traditional hierarchical power structures, they're not only naturally falling apart, like, they're dinosaurs, they're getting old and dying, they're actively being deconstructed by people who are coming in with a critical theory perspective, with a feminist and gender studies perspective, doing this in different languages linguistically takes all of the theory apart. And you have to put it back together again in a way that linguistically and culturally makes sense. So, I mean, you can't chop this up into so many pieces and then put it back together the same way that it was. Um, so, like, just all of this circulating, it's somehow reconfiguring Gestalt.
Mhm.
That's pretty much what I see happening. And where that goes is wherever the process takes it.
Mhm. Thank you for your interesting thoughts, and maybe there is something else you want to add, or maybe there is some questions which I didn't ask.
Um, yeah, I think we should just keep doing this for a few years and like go in that spiral and then come back to it and come back to it again. And then, we should have a dialogue where I ask you and then we talk about your answers. And yeah, no, I don't think I have a big final statement as any kind of authority. And, all of this is my own very personal experience. Please don't take this as an authority.
Okay, because actually we studied personal experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's all I have. Am I right?
Mhm.
I don't think so. I don't actually want the responsibility of being right about anything.
Mhm. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I hope it was useful.